My name is Emma, I'm 48, and my husband promoted my lazy sister to the job I had earned, right in front of my face. Before I tell you how I tore up his desperate job offer to make me CEO 6 months later, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all came to a head on a Tuesday, but the poison had been seeping into the foundations of my life for years. The air in my husband Robert's office was always kept at a precise, chilly temperature, a perfect metaphor for the man he had become. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk that had belonged to his father, a desk that seemed to amplify his sense of entitlement. He wore a smug smile, the one that always appeared when he believed he had one, when he thought he'd outsmarted someone. For 15 years, that someone had been a competitor, a supplier, a rival. That day, it was me. "Emma, come in, have a seat," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. He gestured to one of the 2 stiff leather chairs that faced his throne. They were guest chairs, designed for intimidation, not comfort. I didn't sit. I walked to the center of the room and stood there, my back straight, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I had been his wife for 15 years and the silent, uncredited partner in this business for the last 5. I knew this meeting wasn't a celebration. I could feel it in the unnatural stillness of the air. "Congratulations," he began, leaning back in his chair, the expensive leather groaning under his weight. "All your hard work has really paid off for the company." His words were a condescending pat on the head, and I felt a familiar hot flash of irritation crawl up my neck. I waited, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to continue. "As you know, the board and I have been deliberating on the new vice president of operations," he said, drawing out the moment. His eyes glinted with a cruel sort of pleasure. "It was a tough decision, but I've made my choice." He paused, savoring it. "I'm promoting your sister, Olivia. She's just got a natural rapport with the team. She's more of a team player." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly aimed stone designed to wound. A team player. My sister, Olivia, who had been with the company for a mere 18 months, a position created just for her. A woman who treated deadlines like vague suggestions and teamwork as something other people did. And I, who had sacrificed vacations, holidays, family gatherings, and countless nights of sleep for this company, I was not a team player. The injustice of it was so profound it was almost surreal. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream or rage as he so clearly expected. In that instant, something inside me shifted. The years of simmering resentment, of being overlooked and undervalued, didn't boil over. Instead, they cooled, hardening into something solid and unbreakable. It was the kind of calm that comes after a devastating storm has passed and all you can see is the wreckage. I saw the last 5 years of my life for what they were, a long, slow, thankless sacrifice on the altar of his ego and my sister's bottomless ambition. I simply nodded, a small, sharp movement of my head. "I see." From the leather portfolio I carried, I pulled out a crisp, white envelope. I walked the few steps to his desk, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor, the only sound in the room. I placed the envelope squarely in the center of his desk, right next to a gaudy, gold-plated pen holder Olivia had given him for Christmas. "This is for you, then." He looked at the envelope, then back at me, his smugness finally faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He had wanted a scene. He had braced himself for tears, for arguments, for the messy drama he could then dismiss as me being too emotional. He didn't get it. He had absolutely no idea what was inside that envelope. He thought it was my surrender. He couldn't have been more wrong. It was my declaration of war. Building that company with Robert had been my life's focus. I remembered the early days so clearly, working from a cramped desk in our spare bedroom, the air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and a shared dream. Or so I thought. I was the one who stayed up all night perfecting the business plan that secured our first major loan. I was the one who designed the logistics system that allowed us to undercut our competitors. I was the one who nurtured the client relationships that formed the bedrock of our success. He was the face, the name on the door. I was the engine, the one behind the scenes making sure the whole machine actually ran. It was a partnership, I told myself. Our successes were shared. Then, 18 months ago, my younger sister Olivia needed a job. Again. She drifted through a half-dozen positions since college, leaving each one with a dramatic sigh about how the environment was toxic or the work unfulfilling. My parents, in their usual fashion, had always treated Olivia like a delicate, precious doll while I was the sturdy, reliable workhorse. They called me, their voices laced with concern for their sensitive younger daughter. "Emma, darling," my mother had cooed, "Robert's company is doing so well. Couldn't he find a little something for poor Olivia to do? Just to help her get back on her feet." Robert, ever eager to please my parents and, as I would later learn, Olivia, didn't just find something. He created a client relations coordinator role out of thin air. It was a glorified assistant position, but it came with a fancy title and a starting salary that had taken me 2 years of grueling work to earn. I watched in disbelief as she flitted around the office, her loud, tinkling laughter echoing in the halls while I was buried in spreadsheets and quarterly projections. She spent more time organizing office parties and gossiping by the coffee machine than she did coordinating with any actual clients. The real warning signs, the ones I so willfully ignored, started subtly at first. Robert would cancel our dinner plans at the last minute, claiming a late meeting with an important client. The next day, Olivia would show up to work wearing a new designer bracelet or talking about a fabulous new restaurant she'd just tried. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my stress was making me see things that weren't there. This was my husband and my sister. They were family. They wouldn't betray me like that. My best friend at the company, Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense project manager, saw it with clearer eyes. We'd started around the same time, and she was the only one who truly knew the extent of my contributions and sacrifices. One afternoon, we managed to slip out for coffee, a rare indulgence for me. "You need to be careful, Emma," she said, her expression unusually serious as she stirred her latte. "I don't like the way he looks at her. It's not normal. He's her brother-in-law, Sarah. And her boss. Of course they're friendly." The words sounded weak even to my own ears. "This is more than friendly," she insisted, leaning forward. "I saw them at the Oak Room last week, that expensive steakhouse downtown." He told everyone in the morning meeting he was going to meet the Henderson group alone. They were in a corner booth, holding hands across the table. They did not look like colleagues, Emma. They looked like a couple on a date. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down, burying it under a mountain of denial. "You probably just misunderstood what you saw," I said, more to convince myself than her. I couldn't let that thought take root. If it did, my entire world, everything I had worked for, would unravel. The dismissal of my work was even more blatant and painful. For 3 years, I had been developing a revolutionary project management system in my spare time. It was my passion project, something I worked on during weekends and late into the night after Robert was asleep. It was an elegant, powerful piece of software designed to integrate every facet of a project, from initial bidding and resource allocation to final delivery and client feedback, into one seamless, intuitive platform. It was designed to eliminate the communication bottlenecks and inefficiencies that plagued our industry. It could save companies like ours millions in lost time and resources. I called it Nexus. The first time I presented the initial concept to Robert, in a formal meeting with our senior managers, he'd scrolled through my detailed presentation with a dismissive air. "It's too complex, Emma," he'd said, not even looking up from his phone where he was answering an email. "We're doing fine with what we have. Let's not try to reinvent the wheel." Across the table, I saw Olivia, who had contributed nothing to the meeting but her presence, give a tiny, triumphant smirk. I didn't give up. I spent another 6 months refining the system, building a working prototype and gathering data to prove its efficacy. I scheduled a second presentation, this time just with him. He cut me off halfway through my opening remarks. "Emma, I've already made my decision on this," he said, his tone laced with impatience. "It's a non-starter. Let it go." That was the day a small, cold part of me finally woke up. It was a part one didn't know existed, a pragmatic, self-preservationist part that whispered, he doesn't see you. He doesn't value you. He never will. Protect yourself. I didn't let that part show on my face. I smiled my usual compliant smile, nodded, and said, okay, you're the boss. But that night, I went home and spent hours researching intellectual property lawyers. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that if Nexus was ever going to see the light of day, it would have to be mine and mine alone. The final straw, the one that shattered my carefully constructed wall of denial, came 3 weeks before the fateful promotion announcement. I was working late, trying to salvage a project that Olivia had neglected. I needed a file from Robert's computer and he had given me his password ages ago for work emergencies. As I was searching his desktop, a new email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was from a luxury hotel downtown. The subject line read, "Your romantic getaway confirmation." My blood ran cold. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. The reservation was for a deluxe suite, for 2 nights. It included a couple's massage and champagne. It was booked under Robert's name. And the email had been forwarded to a personal, non-work address I didn't recognize. Out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't control, I did a quick search for the address. It belonged to Olivia. At the same time, a text message arrived on my phone. It was from Sarah. It was just a picture, with no words. It was a photo she had taken with her phone, clearly through a restaurant window. In it, Robert and Olivia were sitting in that same corner booth at the Oak Room. His hand was covering hers on the table. They were leaning in close, their faces inches apart, sharing a dessert with 2 spoons, laughing intimately. The digital evidence and the photographic proof, arriving at the same moment, created a perfect storm of betrayal. It was undeniable. It was irrefutable. It was the end. I left the office without a word to anyone. I drove aimlessly for an hour before finding myself at a deserted lookout point over the city, a place we used to go when we were first married, when the future seemed bright and full of promise. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and for 1 full minute, I let myself completely fall apart. I didn't just cry, I sobbed. A raw, guttural sound of a heart breaking, of 15 years of love and trust turning to ash in my mouth. It was a funeral for my marriage, for my family, for the naive, trusting woman I used to be. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I wiped my face, the tears leaving cold tracks on my skin. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, but behind the pain, there was something new. Something hard and clear and sharp. The storm was over. The decision was made. I wasn't going to be a victim in their sordid little drama. I was going to be the author of my own damn story. The next morning, I didn't confront him. I didn't pack a bag and leave a dramatic note. I went to work. But my first call wasn't to a client. It was to the top-rated patent lawyer in the state, Mr. Davies. I have a fully developed, proprietary software system, I told him over the phone, my voice as steady and cool as steel. I have documentation proving I developed it independently, on my own time, after my concepts were formally rejected by my employer. I need to get it patented under my name, and my name alone. Urgently. Mr. Davies was sharp and efficient. He saw the brilliance in Nexus immediately. "This is impressive, Ms. Miller," he said during our first meeting, looking over the reams of documentation I provided. "This is very, very valuable. You were right to act decisively." We started the process that day. My next call was to a formidable financial advisor who specialized in asset protection during contentious divorces. Her name was Carol, and she had the demeanor of a drill sergeant. "I have a significant inheritance from my mother's estate that I brought into my marriage," I explained, my voice devoid of emotion. "I also have my own investment portfolio, built from my salary before I joined my husband's firm. I need to protect it. I want to set up an irrevocable trust. It was the money my mother had left me after her funeral, whispering that I should always have something that was just mine, a fund for my independence. I finally understood the depth of her wisdom. Carol nodded grimly. "It's smart to do this now, before you file for divorce," she said. "An irrevocable trust is an ironclad wall. Once the assets are in, they are no longer marital property. They are yours, and yours alone. He won't be able to touch a cent." While these legal wheels were turning in the background, I went about my days at the office like a ghost. I performed my duties flawlessly, but I was detached, an observer in my own life. Robert and Olivia, emboldened by my apparent submission and what they perceived as my depressed withdrawal, grew more brazen. They would leave for long lunches together, returning with flushed faces and private smiles. They were so consumed by their own cleverness that they never once suspected what I was doing. The final public humiliation came at the last company-wide meeting before the promotion was announced. Robert made a point of publicly praising Olivia for landing a small account, an account I had personally nurtured for months before handing it to her on a silver platter with step-by-step instructions. Then, he shot down a cost-saving initiative I proposed, one that would have saved the company $250,000, claiming it was not the right time for that kind of disruption. He did it in front of everyone. Olivia looked at me from across the room, her eyes filled with a sickening, pitying triumph. That was their final, public power play. They thought they were putting me in my place for good. They had no idea they were just sealing their own fates. That night, I went home to my study. I opened the locked file drawer in my desk. I printed out the official email confirmations for the patent application from Mr. Davies's office. I printed the signed and notarized documents from Carol establishing the Emma Miller Irrevocable Trust. And I printed out a high-resolution copy of the photo Sarah had sent me, along with a dozen of the most damning text messages I'd found on our shared tablet, messages filled with their plans to push me out, their mockery of my work, and details of their affair that still made my stomach churn. I slipped everything into a clean, white, 9x12 envelope. On top, I placed a single sheet of my best stationery. It was my resignation, effective immediately. There were no explanations, no bitter words. Just two simple, powerful sentences. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. The days leading up to my resignation were the strangest of my life. I moved through the office with a serene, almost detached focus. I organized my files, finalized my pending projects, and wrote meticulously detailed handover notes. To anyone watching, I was the model employee, the consummate professional ensuring a smooth transition for my successor. In reality, I was meticulously disarming a bomb, making sure that when it went off, the only shrapnel that flew would be theirs. Robert and Olivia, completely oblivious, mistook my quiet efficiency for defeat. Their arrogance swelled to an unbearable degree. They would stand by the coffee machine, whispering and laughing, their voices just loud enough for me to hear snippets about new directions and fresh leadership. They were already planning my funeral in the company I had bled for, and they were enjoying every second of it. During this time, I spent my evenings not grieving, but preparing for my next act. I remembered a business conference from 2 years prior. I had been invited to speak on a panel discussing industry innovations. After my presentation, a man had approached me, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He introduced himself as Jonathan Grant, the CEO of Westbridge Industries, our biggest and most respected competitor. "That was a brilliant analysis, Ms. Miller," he'd said, handing me his card. "Your insights on logistical streamlining are years ahead of the curve. If you ever feel like you're not being challenged enough where you are, give me a call." At the time, I had been flattered but fiercely loyal. I had politely thanked him and put the card away in a drawer, never intending to use it. Now, I dug through my old conference materials until I found it. The card was simple, elegant, printed on heavy stock. Jonathan Grant, CEO. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like a lifeline, a sign from a past version of myself who had earned respect she wasn't receiving. Taking a deep breath, I composed a short, professional email. I reintroduced myself, reminded him of our meeting at the conference, and mentioned that I was exploring new opportunities. I attached a one-page, non-proprietary overview of a next-generation management system I had developed, a system with the potential to revolutionize workflow efficiency. I didn't beg. I didn't sound desperate. I presented it as an opportunity for him. I hit send and felt a flutter of nervous hope. It was a shot in the dark, but it was the first shot I had taken for myself in a very long time. And then came that Tuesday. I walked into Robert's office, knowing it was the last time I would ever set foot in it. Olivia was already there, perched on the edge of his desk like a vulture waiting for a meal. Her smile was a slash of bright red lipstick, an expression of pure, unadulterated victory. "Congratulations, Emma, your hard work paid off." Robert's voice was a smug drawl. "I'm promoting your sister Olivia instead of you. She's more of a team player." I let the silence hang for a beat, watching the triumph in their eyes. It was a look I would never forget. I reached into my bag, my hand steady, and pulled out the white envelope. I walked forward and placed it on the desk. "This is for you, then." Robert picked it up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He clearly expected me to leave, to slink away in shame. But I didn't. I stood my ground, my arms crossed, and waited. I wanted to see their faces. "What's this?" he asked, tearing it open with a careless flick of his thumb. Olivia leaned in, her red lips parted in a curious smirk. His eyes scanned the first page. It was my resignation letter. 2 lines. Clean, simple, and final. His smirk wavered. "Resigning? Emma, don't be so dramatic. This is a family business. We can find another role for you." "Keep reading," I said, my voice quiet but firm as iron. He pulled out the next document. His eyes widened. The smugness vanished, replaced by a wave of disbelief that washed over his face. It was the official filing receipt from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Nexus Integrated Management System." And below that, under the heading Inventor, was a single name, Emma Miller. What is this?" he stammered, his face starting to pale. "This is a company project. This is company property. You can't do this." "No, Robert," I said calmly, taking a small step forward. "It doesn't belong to the company. You formally rejected it. Twice. Your exact words were, 'Let it go.'" "So I did. I let it go right into the hands of a patent lawyer who understood its value." Olivia snatched the paper from his hand. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into an ugly mask of rage as she read it. "You went behind our backs? You snake," she hissed. "Keep reading," I repeated, my gaze fixed on Robert, who now looked like he was going to be sick. His trembling hands pulled out the next set of papers. They were the printouts. The first was the high-resolution photo Sarah had sent me, the two of them, hands clasped, at the Oak Room, looking for all the world like a cheating couple. The next few pages were the screenshots of their text messages, filled with their plans to push me out, their mockery of my work, and intimate details of their affair that made my stomach churn. Robert dropped the pages as if they were on fire. They scattered across his pristine desk like toxic confetti. He looked at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The blood had drained from it, leaving him looking gray and old. "Emma. We can explain. It's not what it looks like." "Isn't it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You called her a team player. I guess this is the kind of team building you had in mind." Olivia was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color had drained from her face, too, leaving her bright red lipstick looking garish and clownish against her pallid skin. "There's one more thing," I said, nodding toward the envelope. With a shaking hand, a hand that looked like it belonged to a very old man, Robert reached in and pulled out the final document. It was a formal, notarized letter from my financial advisory firm. It stated, in cold, inescapable legal terms, that the Emma Miller Irrevocable Trust had been established weeks ago, and that all of my personal assets, including my entire multi-million-dollar inheritance, were now held within it, completely and legally firewalled from any and all marital claims in a future divorce. That was the final blow. The kill shot. The realization hit him like a physical impact. He wasn't just losing the genius behind his company's potential future. He wasn't just exposed as a cheating, lying husband. He had lost access to my money, the safety net he had always taken for granted. He slumped back in his chair, the fight completely gone out of him. He looked from the damning papers to my face, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. "Emma, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll give you the promotion. Right now. We can forget Olivia was ever in the running." Olivia let out a strangled gasp, looking at him in utter betrayal. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I looked at them both, at the smoldering ruins of their pathetic little coup. And I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Just a profound, cleansing sense of release. I turned and walked to the door. "It was never about the promotion, Robert," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "It was about respect. A concept neither of you will ever understand." I walked out of that office and didn't look back. I could hear the shouting start before the door even clicked shut behind me, the sound of their worthless empire beginning to crumble. The first 24 hours were a blur of adrenaline and radio silence. I had already packed a bag with my essentials and checked into a quiet extended-stay hotel downtown. The first thing I did was block Robert's and Olivia's numbers. The barrage of calls started almost immediately, pinging my phone's blocked list with a frantic rhythm before tapering off into a stream of angry, desperate, and finally pleading texts that I swiped away without reading. The silence that followed was both liberating and terrifying. For 15 years, my life had been inextricably intertwined with Robert's. My schedule, my social life, my career, it was all tied to him. Now, there was just me. I sat in the sterile, impersonal hotel room, looking out at the glittering city lights, and a wave of cold uncertainty washed over me. I had just detonated my life. What in God's name was I going to do now? That was when I allowed myself to think about the email to Jonathan Grant. I had sent it as a final, hopeful act of defiance, but I hadn't let myself actually depend on it. He was the CEO of a major corporation. The chances of him even seeing it, let alone responding, were slim to none. I spent a restless night, the what-ifs chasing each other around my head. The next morning, as I was sipping a cup of bad hotel coffee and scrolling through job listings that felt miles beneath my skill level and experience, my phone buzzed with a new email. My heart leaped into my throat. The sender was Catherine Finch, executive assistant to Jonathan Grant. My hand trembled as I opened it. The email was brief and professional. "Mr. Grant was intrigued by your proposal. He would like to invite you for an informal discussion at your earliest convenience." An informal discussion. It wasn't a job offer, but it was a door creaking open. A surge of purpose shot through me. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I put together a comprehensive, high-level presentation on Nexus, focusing on its potential ROI for a company of Westbridge's scale. I went out and bought a new suit, a powerful, dark navy one that made me feel like the professional I was, not the scorned wife I had been. Meanwhile, the fallout at my old company was swift and brutal. Sarah kept me updated with short, discreet texts. Robert had called an emergency board meeting. He tried to spin a story about me having a nervous breakdown, of stealing company property. But the board members weren't fools. They were businessmen who understood the value of innovation and stability. My departure, combined with the sudden resignation of the newly appointed VP of Operations, Olivia had apparently cleared out her desk and vanished without a word, left a power vacuum and a lot of unanswered questions. The company's biggest client, an account I had personally managed for 3 years, was already making noise about the instability and demanding answers. The cracks were already showing. The day of my meeting with Jonathan Grant, I felt a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. Westbridge Industries headquarters was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, a world away from the stuffy, traditional, wood-paneled offices of Robert's company. It felt like stepping into the future. Jonathan Grant's office was on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the city that seemed to stretch on forever. He was exactly as I remembered, sharp, focused, with an energy that filled the room. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Emma," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming in. Your one-page overview was the most interesting thing to cross my desk all year. Tell me more." For the next hour, I walked him through Nexus. I didn't just talk about code and algorithms, I talked about vision. I talked about efficiency, scalability, and competitive advantage. He listened intently, asking sharp, insightful questions that showed he was not just hearing me, but understanding me. He saw the value that Robert had been too arrogant and too blind to see. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Robert is a bigger fool than I thought," he said, shaking his head. "To have this in-house and not see its potential, it's corporate malpractice." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Westbridge doesn't just want your system, Emma. We want the mind that created it. But I'm a realist. A big idea is one thing, execution is another." My heart sank a little. I had been hoping for a clean break, a direct offer. "So here's my proposal," he continued. "I'm not going to offer you a vice president title today. That has to be earned here, no matter who you are. I'm going to offer you a 3-month, high-level consulting contract. I'll give you a small, elite team of my best engineers and all the resources you need. Your sole objective, implement a pilot version of Nexus on one of our most challenging active projects. Show me it works in the real world, under pressure. If you do that, we'll talk about a permanent position. A very permanent, very senior position." It wasn't the instant victory I might have dreamed of, but it was something better. It was real. It was a challenge. A chance to prove my worth on my own terms, with no husband or sister in the picture. The consulting salary he offered for the 3 months was more than I had made in a full year working for Robert. "Mr. Grant," I said, a real, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "I accept." The next 3 months were a whirlwind. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, but this time, it was different. It was exhilarating. Every late night, every complex problem solved, was for me. I wasn't building someone else's dream anymore, I was building my own. The team Jonathan gave me was brilliant. They were skeptical at first, as any top-tier engineers would be of an outsider with a new, unproven system. A young, hotshot engineer named Ben was particularly challenging, questioning every decision I made. But I didn't get defensive. I answered his questions with data. I walked him through the logic. I showed him the elegance of the code. 2 weeks in, he came to my temporary office. "Okay," he said, a look of grudging respect in his eyes. "I get it now. This is genius. What do you need from me?" He became my biggest advocate. We hit our deadline, launching the Nexus pilot program on a massive, complex construction project that had been plagued by delays and cost overruns. Within the first month, the results were staggering. Communication bottlenecks vanished. Resource allocation became 90% more efficient. The project, which had been projected to be 6 months behind schedule, was suddenly ahead of schedule and under budget. I was proving my worth with undeniable results. While I was thriving, Robert's company was dying a slow, painful death. Sarah told me their biggest client had officially pulled their multi-million-dollar contract, citing a complete lack of confidence in the current leadership. Other clients followed suit like dominoes. The company was hemorrhaging money. The board was in open revolt. On the last day of my 3-month contract, Jonathan Grant called me into his office. He didn't say a word. He just slid a contract across his desk. At the top, it read, Employment Agreement, Emma Miller, Vice President of Strategic Development. The compensation package, including salary and stock options, was more than I could have imagined. It was a validation so complete, so absolute, it almost brought tears to my eyes. I signed the contract. My new life had officially begun. The final chapter of that old life closed 6 months after I walked out of Robert's office. It didn't happen at a glitzy gala or a fancy restaurant. It happened in the one place I never thought I'd enter again, the boardroom of my former company. I received a formal, almost pleading, email from the chairman of the board, a stuffy man named Mr. Peterson whom I had known for years. He requested my presence at an emergency meeting to discuss the future of the company. Curiosity, more than anything else, made me accept. I wanted to see the wreckage up close. When I walked in, wearing my Westbridge ID badge like a medal, the atmosphere was funereal. The board members, all men in their late 60s, looked exhausted and defeated. And in a chair in the corner of the room, looking small and utterly broken, sat Robert. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit hung on him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The chairman got straight to the point. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Their stock was worthless. They had lost their reputation. They were a laughingstock in the industry. Emma, he said, his voice heavy with regret. We made a terrible, terrible mistake. We see that now. The board has voted to remove Robert from all duties and sever all ties with him, effective immediately. Robert flinched as if he'd been physically struck. We want to make you an offer, the chairman continued, pushing a thick, leather-bound document across the polished table. We want you to come back. Not as a VP. We are offering you the position of CEO. You'll have full autonomy, a controlling interest in the company, and whatever salary you name. Please, Emma. You're the only one who can save this company. I looked at the contract. Chief Executive Officer. The job Robert had always assumed would be his by birthright. I looked at the desperate, greedy faces around the table, men who had stood by silently while I was being humiliated. And then I looked at Robert. He finally raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Emma. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. For everything. For what I did to you, to us. Olivia and I, we're over. It was all a mistake, a terrible mistake. Please. I let the silence sit for a moment. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the casual cruelty, the public humiliation. I thought about the woman who had stood in Robert's office, her world collapsing around her. And I thought about the woman I was now, respected, valued, and powerful in her own right, the vice president of a thriving, innovative company. I picked up the contract. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of all that pain and betrayal. The men around the table held their breath, leaning forward in anticipation. Then, calmly and deliberately, I tore it in half. A collective gasp went through the room. The sound of the tearing paper was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I placed the 2 pieces neatly on the table. Thank you for the offer, I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing with a newfound authority. But this company was built on a toxic foundation. I have no interest in cleaning up your mess. I stood up and turned my gaze to Robert one last time. And as for your apology, I said, letting the words land with quiet finality, I don't accept it. Some things can't be fixed. I turned and walked out of that boardroom, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt the last chains of my old life fall away. I was free. My future was my own, and it was brilliant. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it can help someone out there who feels unseen or undervalued. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your own worth? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. You are stronger than you think.